the small town of Dudleytown, unfortunate and sometimes even mystical occurrences have often occurred. The town is notorious for its history and obvious reputation. People and livestock regularly disappear without a trace. Visitors attribute this to the town's location, surrounded primarily by wooded areas and empty cornfields overgrown with grass and other odds and ends. It all began back in the distant 16th century. At that time, Duke Edmund Dudley, whose family name the town would later be named after, was executed. According to unreliable reports, Edmund was fascinated with and dabbled in black magic and occult rituals. Although the town's historical manuscripts didn't mention it, according to the townspeople themselves, the Duke, before his execution, summoned a dark being whose appearance was deceptive and could confuse and destroy the unwary. The Duke, according to the townspeople, also cursed the town and those who dared live there or come to these valleys. But these were myths and hypotheses. Scholars who have explored the area around Dudleytown and the town itself attribute this to nothing more than a series of coincidences and accidents. But the townspeople know the truth. On New Year's Eve, when the paranormal activity in the area was at its peak, a reporter arrived in town. He had heard the story about these lands and knew their history. Thomas, that was the reporter's name, wanted to solve the mystery of Dudleytown and stop the chain of events unfolding there at any cost. Pulling up in his pickup truck, Thomas grabbed his backpack from the seat and stepped out. The door barely opened, buffeted by a fierce snowstorm. It was bitterly cold outside, and it seemed there was more snow than in Antarctica. Snow clouds had blanketed the sky, casting a dark blue gloom over the city. Thomas stopped at a small but seemingly cozy shop, made of freshly cut logs and adorned with spruce branches from the roof. Stepping inside, he was greeted by residents, both young and old, wearing warm sweaters, sitting at tables or at the bar sipping hot cocoa and cookies. Their faces were filled with joy and amusement, which was odd, considering the city's reputation and the events that took place there. Without hesitation, Thomas walked inside and sat at the bar next to a plump old man with a bright flush on his cheeks. He sported a white beard and mustache, like Santa Claus, casually sipping his cocoa, drops of which were dripping down his beard and mustache. He suddenly turned his attention to Thomas and greeted him with a grin, clapping him on the shoulder. The grandfather introduced himself as Bell and began asking the reporter why he had come here and what he wanted in these latitudes. Remarkably, Thomas hadn't yet spoken to anyone when he entered the shop. How the man knew Thomas was a stranger is unknown, although the town is small, so it's obvious where he was from. Thomas shared his purpose with him, and when the grandfather heard it, as did the other customers in the shop, the smile he had been wearing all this time immediately vanished. The people themselves frowned as well. They turned back toward Thomas and began looking at him with a frightening expression. The boy felt uneasy. Silence fell in the shop. The bartender silently wiped his glass until it scraped clean, his serious gaze fixed on the young man. A few minutes later, the old man spoke again, but there was something different in his voice, something that hadn't been there at the beginning of their conversation. "Get out of here, boy," the older man said. "I can't leave here without material. I came here to find out everything connected with your town. I want to understand what's plaguing your valley and help if I can," Thomas replied. Meanwhile, people began to slowly gather and leave the shop. Only the local sheriff remained, silently watching the conversation between the old man and the young man, listening attentively to their every word. Thomas's conversation faltered, and the older man, with sullen eyes and an angry expression, grabbed his dark red fur coat from the counter and awkwardly climbed down from his chair, heading for the exit. Thomas sat there for a moment, lost in thought, and soon headed for the exit as well, realizing he was unlikely to dispel the Dudleytown mystery and bring back the finished story. The sheriff remained seated until the end, watching the reporter, and when he left, he leisurely picked up his hat, placed it on his head, and then followed him out. Thomas started a car, and as he was getting in, was stopped by the same sheriff, who quickly ran out of the store. He ran up to Thomas and began asking him if he was sure he could help the town, to which Thomas replied that he would do everything in his power. The sheriff, after a pause, told him that Thomas should follow him, and afterward the sheriff would tell him something. After starting the car, the wheels jerked through the soft snow, almost spinning, and they set off. The sheriff led the way in his patrol jeep, with Thomas bringing up the rear. They drove for a long time, 2 hours. They drove along snow-covered roads, sometimes even wading through small drifts. Outside, a blizzard raged, and the wind blew so hard it seemed it would tip the car over. Finally, arriving at their destination, they stopped near an old wooden house. Getting out of the car, the reporter followed the sheriff, who gestured for him to enter. Inside, the cabin looked industrious. The sheriff lit the fireplace and sat down in a rotten, battered chair with a mug of tea. Thomas walked closer and sat down in a similar chair next to the bearded sheriff. The sheriff, taking a sip and pausing for a moment, told the boy a story. "I wasn't born here. I came here simply to serve. Believe me, in my short time serving in these parts, I've seen a lot of horrors. One time, closer to New Year's, I received a call from an elderly woman. She told me she heard something breaking into her house. When I arrived, I saw that the doors of her house had been ripped out by the roots and were lying on the ground with deep scratches on the outside. Entering the house, my partner and I split up and went to search the house. It was dark and quiet. When I entered one of the rooms, I saw a terrifying and disgusting scene. The body of the same elderly woman was lying on the floor, headless, and the head was impaled on the top of a small Christmas tree standing in the same room. On top of everything else, her face was panicked and the body was practically torn to pieces. Then I started getting similar calls more and more frequently. The victim said they saw a silhouette in their window and that someone was climbing into their house through the chimney. One day, a mother of four even called and said she spotted a man in her backyard dragging something wrapped in a sack along the ground. She also said the man was incredibly tall and that he was wearing a Santa Claus suit. But the suit looked dirty, torn in places, and stained with something red like blood. One evening, responding to another call, I arrived at a dugout. I went inside and found no one there, and was just about to leave when I suddenly heard the crunch of branches in the trees. It was dark, so I turned on my flashlight and saw in its light what now haunts me in my nightmares. Something resembling a man was crouched behind two trees, but it wasn't. It was dressed in a Santa Claus suit and leaned toward the ground as if eating something. I couldn't see what it was. Noticing the beam of my flashlight, it turned and looked at me, and then indeed my heart sank. Its face was distorted to the point of exhaustion. It was withered, very thin, and elongated. It was also dark, and I could see that it had two mouths. Its eyes bulged from their sockets and glowed a bright yellow when the light hit them. Seeing me, it screamed and ran toward me. I pulled my pistol from its holster and shot it, which it didn't expect, and it fled in fear somewhere into the depths of the forest. And so I saw what had most likely terrorized this county for a long time. As he recounted this, the sheriff kept his gaze fixed on the fireplace and the fire, as if recalling it all as if it were yesterday. Having finished his story, he drank all the tea with a deft flick of his hand and placed the mug on the floor, asking the boy to attend their town's New Year's feast. They had held such a feast every New Year, but soon stopped. And now, having reached an agreement with the authorities, the sheriff wants to bring back the tradition. The feast will be held in a theater building located on the outskirts of Dudleytown. All the townspeople and the local authorities will be there. The reporter agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, on New Year's Eve, everyone gathered in the building where the banquet was being held. A large table stood with various dishes. Inside, the building looked and vaguely resembled a church. Thomas arrived and, seeing the sheriff standing at the entrance to the theater building, approached him. After a short conversation, the two of them waited for the festivities to begin. The clock began to strike 12. Everyone rose from their seats and began congratulating each other. The mayor himself also congratulated the citizens. People began clinking glasses. The large clock face, hanging directly from the ceiling in the middle of the hall, struck the 6th time. Thomas, who hadn't seen such a spectacle often, began filming the entire event with his camera, with the sheriff's permission. The clock struck 9, 10, 11. Outside, the blizzard had been raging again all this time, a snowstorm and sleet rattling its old shutters on the building's windows. Suddenly, something flashed past the window. The sheriff was the first to notice, followed by Thomas. By then, the crowd had already begun celebrating and enjoying themselves, unaware that the clock had stopped striking 11. Its hands had stopped moving and stood at precisely 11:59. But as expected, no one noticed. Thomas glanced warily at the clock face. and noticing that the hands had stopped moving, began calling the sheriff and asking him if their clocks always stopped on New Year's Eve, just before the stroke of 12. The sheriff, puzzled, told the boy he didn't know, as this was the first time they'd celebrated the lights in this theater building. The sheriff was about to approach the mayor to ask him about it, but then darkness began to fill the windows, blocking their view of the street. It seemed to be coming from the tops of the frames, and like a liquid, it quickly and swiftly coated the half-frozen glass. The sheriff and Thomas stood there stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. Only later did the sheriff realize what was happening. He quickly made his way through the crowd of townspeople dancing joyfully, pushing everyone aside. He started shouting that everyone needed to get out of the building as quickly as possible, but no one heard him, and those who did heard him were telling the sheriff to stop panicking and start having fun with them. He nervously pushed people, telling them that something terrible was about to happen, and after struggling to reach the mayor, he began telling him that everyone needed to be evacuated immediately. "Why are you panicking for no reason? Go and have fun unless you want to be fired from this town," the mayor muttered angrily, holding a glass of wine. "But, sir," the sheriff persisted. Then suddenly, the lights in the theater building suddenly went out. The music stopped. The people stopped dancing and began shouting angrily, demanding that the music and lights be turned back on. Suddenly, a man's scream rang out. Everyone in the room fell silent. Then another man's scream rang out. The man was screaming for help, saying that something had just attacked him and was tearing him apart. The residents began to panic and run in different directions in the darkness. Thomas was recording the entire time. His heart began to beat faster, and his pulse rose. The recording could be heard as Thomas breathed quickly and nervously, confused and frightened. Behind him, Thomas suddenly heard someone's heavy breathing. It was so hoarse and low that it reached all the way to his knees and made his bones tremble. The boy wanted to run, but then something hit him hard in the back and head simultaneously. Unable to withstand the impact, he lost his balance and crashed into a woman. The impact caused him to trip and fall to the floor, hitting his head. His vision blurred, and the screams of the people around him faded, sounding as if they were underwater. The last thing Thomas noticed before losing consciousness was a large silhouette standing in the middle of the room on a table. Behind the silhouette was something thick and equally large, like a hump or a sack. Then Thomas passed out, and everything went silent. The boy woke up bound in chains. He was sitting by a stone fireplace, above which, hanging from human fingers nailed to it, were bloody and torn Christmas stockings. Looking around, Thomas noticed he was in some sort of cave, a room that looked like it had been furnished. Oblong, half-dirty, bloody bags, roughly the size of a man, hung on the walls. Looking down, Thomas saw the sheriff's body. His limbs were broken. His left arm had been torn off. His cheek had been bitten off, exposing his bare jaw and teeth. His scalp had been practically torn off and lay nearby. Thomas was horrified and tried to get up, but then, in the distance, in the stark darkness, sparks appeared, and the creaking and grinding of chains could be heard. It was walking straight toward Thomas with slow steps. Its growling was igniting a panic in the boy which was already overwhelming. Something was saying out loud, "New Year is coming! New Year is coming! Santa Claus is racing! He's bringing presents!" The end.